Thank you so much for coming. I have a just immediate question, even from hearing the bios for you, that is probably on a lot of people's minds, which is how does a physicist decide to spend this much time working on art, and how, where does that kind of intuition come from to live in both worlds? As someone who lives in both worlds, there's always this kind of tension of, more time you spend in one is always taken away from the other.
Well, can I ask the same question of you, since you also have a background in physics and have decided to become, to a large extent, an artist with your fabulous installations. Has anybody seen Jeff's Waves installation? We're going to see it up here at some point. Well, it's a totally awesome sculpture, a kinetic sculpture. It will be coming up. And when it does come up, I think Jeff and I should stop talking. You should just look at the thing because it's so amazing and beautiful. Well, I have been interested in both the science and the arts since a young age, so that's basically the answer to the question. When I was 10, 12, 14 years old, I had two groups of friends. I had the science friends who liked answers to all their questions, who did their math homework first, and then I had the arts friends who acted in the school plays and were more interested in the questions and the answers and so on. And I enjoyed both the sciences and the arts from a young age. And the area of science that I was in, theoretical physics, is one that people peak at a very young age. Most theoretical physicists have done their best work by the time they're 35. After I turned 35, with my best work, such as it was, behind me, I began writing more, which I'd put on the back burner, and so it was a natural evolution of increasing powers in one area and decreasing powers in another for me to begin spending more time with my writing and with the humanities. So let me ask the same question for you. What made you decide to either stop doing research physics or to divert it to an area in the arts?
Yeah, I like you, constantly had one foot in each camp. I didn't really realize until you just said it that I had science friends and art friends, but that was happening as well. Once you go to a place like MIT, the only people that are there, if they're doing art at all, are science art people, because everyone's a science person. But yeah, there was something that happened specifically to me when I saw Arthur Ganson's work at the MIT Museum, which I don't know how many of you have seen that. And I'll couple that with when I took a class on designing machines when I was a senior. I had an extra time to take a mechanical engineering class. And I had always been doing art in terms of painting and music and things like that. But once I did that and I realized that I could kind of mix everything together. It was always scientific because you're always kind of making guesses as to how things are going out and engineering solutions. But like you said, it was more, the question was the most important part. There was no kind of, oh, we're done now. Now we understand how the universe works. We can go home. It was like, what if this is happening? How will this play with human perception in some fun way?
Excuse me, I just want to point out Breaking Wave is about to.
So this is a great segue, great time. I'll talk minimally over it. Can everyone see it okay? Because we're blind up here from. Yeah, this is a great example of the kind of question. For me, this was a very unknown question that obviously requires a lot of engineering, but the main question is a perceptual question, which is how do we synthesize our belief in objects being real. You know, how do we have 800 of these objects floating through three-dimensional space, and kind of as soon as your mind starts to perceive pattern in that, it finds it harder and harder to pay attention to the individual components. So it resolves from these two angles. You know, one is when you're leaving the building like this, and you'll see in the end of the film a second perspective point. So it's the same cloud of 800 points, and it's this trick of perception. And when we were first building prototypes for this, we didn't even know if, even if you built it perfectly, if the human mind could synthesize it, because you have all these light and shadows, and you know, will the mind actually be able to play that game? So for me, you know, the arts are in some ways very deeply connected to the sciences with the sense of these questions, but the questions are, in both camps, they're not really trying to be done. They're trying to expose the next question. I forget the physicist who said, you know, the more that if our knowledge is an island, the bigger the island gets, the longer the shoreline. And so the questions always get more and more questions.
So I wanted to just make a comment on this, that, and you can correct me on the engineering side of this. Each of those 800 balls is suspended by a string. The strings are going up to the ceiling that are being turned on these rotors, and the elevation of each individual string is being controlled, and all of that is being run by a computer somewhere, I would assume.
So it's actually, to design it, it was like that. But the final thing is literally that you plug it into the wall, and it's just one motor.
So it's totally mechanical.
So this is the mechanical computer. It's almost like Babbage's old, adding machines, computational devices. The bigger the pulley, the higher it will pull the ball. And so we composed this and ordered, 804 custom-sized pulleys, and then one cam that kind of gives the wave animation, so that it can't do anything else. It can only do this one.
But when you go from one kind of pattern to another, that must require a different set of...
So that was the hardest part of the project. Both images have to happen at the same time in the same exact set of spheres. So
Could you say that again?
Yeah, so what you'll see what I guess just showed up probably was the other image, the flower image. The flower image and the labyrinth image, which looks a little like that target, they happen at exactly the same time in the same sphere of these balls. So, 3 people, it's kind of almost like an Einsteinian relativity thing. 3 people can be standing looking at exactly the same thing. One will see total chaos, one will see a labyrinth, and one will see this flower pattern. And in some sense, none of them are right and all of them are right. It's just a question of perspective. So to answer the question, what came down for me was that when I was working on physics, if I would only have been working on physics, there would always have been this constant tension that I wasn't kind of like involved with my senses. I was involved with my mind. I was kind of putting myself in thought experiments, trying to imagine subatomic particles and things like that. But I was in a totally different way of being when I was playing music, or when I was, designing one of these pieces. And so for me, a lot of this comes down to the different intelligences of the body and how they can all be activated in different ways.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, if it's okay. What would you say are the different aims of science versus the aims of art?
How much time do we have for this? You are definitely more of a scientist than I am. So why don't I try to answer the art part, which I already know I can't answer, and then we can chisel away at it. For me, I think art is this constant... Okay, so I have to kind of define some terms to even get into this conversation. I feel like one thing that we often do in the modern world is we talk about art, but we're actually thinking about pieces. We're thinking about the products of the artistic process. And for me, art is, in some sense, like entirely or 99% about the process of art making and of the state of mind or state of being that you get into when you are in that process. And then, if you are engaged in that process and in the flow with that movement, products come out of it. But the products to me are always this kind of secondary side effect. It's great, none of these things would happen if I didn't have a deadline and a goal and all that kind of stuff. But really, for me, it's an excuse to put myself into a state of mind that is, it's almost wrong to even try to describe it as a state of mind. It's like, we all know these moments when we get so lost in what we're doing that we forget what time it is. So whether you call it being in the flow or being in the zone or letting the universe speak through you or whatever, it comes down to the same kind of thing for me. It's a constant opportunity to lose your sense of separateness from everything. So for me, the arts, that's the aim for me for the arts.
Well, I think that the state of mind that you describe is exactly the same as state of mind in doing science. Certainly pure science as opposed to non-applied science. I would describe it very similarly to yours about art, that it's a state of mind in which you lose all sense of your ego, you lose sense of yourself, you lose sense of where you are, and I'm sure that maybe most of you here have had that experience. We're calling it the creative moment, or moments when you forget what time it is, you forget where you are, and I've had that experience in science when I'm really deeply into a problem and I'm in another state of mind. I've also had that experience when I'm writing. I write in two places. One of them is a beautiful place by the ocean in Maine, and there, when I look out of my window from my writing desk, I see a pine needle path that wanders down to the ocean. And the other place that I write is a little desk in a storage room off my garage in Concord. And it's just, this room is just big enough for me to pace a little bit. It has no windows, and when I look up from my writing desk there, I see a plaster wall. And both of these places have served me equally well as a writer, because after 5 minutes I have disappeared into this magical space that I'm creating in. And that's the disappearance of the body in the place. So I think that the creative moment, from what you've described and what I've experienced, is very similar. So if the creative moment is the same, what is the difference between science and art?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some sense, the very kind of practical answer is that science has the goal of understanding the objective universe. And I don't think that an artist would say that their goal was to understand the way that the universe objectively exists, the kind of fundamental mathematical patterns that underlie it. Maybe some artists are trying to do that.
What would they say the goal is?
For the artists?
The artists, yes.
Yeah, I think it would be to learn the habit of maintaining that sense of non-separation from everything. You know, to go, it's kind of the pull of going back to this experience that constantly removes this feeling that you are separate in the universe and allows just activity to be flowing naturally. For me, that's, I guess, it's very explicit, but I think it seems like underlying to a lot of artists' goals.
And when you say that that's the goal, do you mean that's the goal that the artist has for himself or herself, or is that the goal that the artist has for the viewer of the art?
That's a great question. You bring two things to mind. I guess this is, I make no claims of consistency in anything I say, or et cetera, et cetera. I'll play the artist card on that one. I think that when you go and you see a Van Gogh painting and it hits you, and it puts you in that state, it's only because while that piece of art was being made, he was in that state. And there's something about transmutation of psychological state of mind that seems to work through art. And I know that if I'm designing something or playing music and I'm stuck in my head and I'm kind of, my resistances to letting that happen are dominant, then the work is very forced and stilted and contracted. And if I feel actually at ease to allow myself to be stupid and make mistakes and play just like a 3-year-old, every 3-year-old knows how to do, then it seems like that gets transmuted into the work and it causes that emotional response in others. So I don't know if that's generally agreed upon, but it feels like that's true for me. I forget how you phrased the question there, but
just whether the goal that you described as being at one with the cosmos, not separated from the universe, and you described it as a goal that you experience in the process of making art. I was asking whether that is the same goal that you have for the external viewer, for the other person who is then witnessing the art, the product that you've created, because the other person is not witnessing your process. They're not in your head. It's only when after you create this product.
Right. So given the first part of the answer that I gave before, there's this kind of paradox about it. It almost feels like if an artist is primarily thinking about trying to engage an unknown receiver in a certain way, at least for me, that's when the mind gets really loud and tries to analyze how this thing is going to function in a goal-oriented way. And if I actually have no goal except for the process of the art making, the irony is that that might have the most potential for affecting others. It's almost funny to say things like, if Van Gogh would get into this state of mind, because if Van Gogh is in the state of mind, there's no Van Gogh there. There's purely just the activity, like that requires maybe a tiny explanation. You can think of Van Gogh as the set of kind of personality, the concepts that Van Gogh has about himself and about what people might like and what people might not like. And that stuff kind of mixes in with these natural tendencies and proclivities and desires, right? I just might like blue. But if I start thinking about what color anyone in the museum is going to like when they see this painting, I might not paint the blue that I like anymore. And so there's these sets of kind of resistances and tensions that overlay what feel like the natural flow. And for me, it's like every day is this experience of just seeing the next layer of resistances that is coming up, keeping me from being as wide a bandwidth channel as possible for those intuitions. And I really am curious, because playwriting is something where you have to kind of have these thoughts about structure. I assume you have to have thoughts about overall structure. You can't just kind of free write a play all at once, or can you?
Well, I'm not a playwright. The play here that is going to be is an adaptation of a novel that I wrote, but I do think that in writing a novel or a play or composing a piece of music, that there always has to be a balance with sort of freewheeling intuition on the one hand and structure on the other hand. I think that it would be hard to read a novel that had no structure, no narrative line at all.
You remind me of a line that someone from Monty Python said, where they said, kind of getting things out there and editing should never be done at the same time, because they're fundamentally kind of at odds with each other. And so maybe what you're kind of highlighting is that there's this flow, but then the mind has to come in there and it has to kind of organize it to make it legible in some way, kind of do the editing and the culling of the crops.
So, in the sciences, we are trying to understand the external world, the world where we can do experiments, where we can measure things with rulers and clocks and objects that are outside of our bodies. And in the arts, we're connecting with the internal world, first and foremost with our own internal world, as you describe, your own process of joining with the cosmos and losing sense of yourself, and then through that, connecting to the internal world of other people. And I would argue that there's an experimental test in the arts, just as there is in the sciences, that if you don't manage to connect to that internal world of other people, then your experiment has told you that you have a false proposition, or another way, you have a piece of art that is not powerful. I think that we've all read novels where we just can't connect with the characters, that they don't ring true to us, they don't resonate with our own life experience with the world. And so I would say, using a scientist's language to describe something that's artistic, I would say that the experiment has falsified that piece of art, or at least shown us that it lacks power.
So you make me think of the kind of, I don't know where the phrase originally came from, but goodness, truth, and beauty. So if I were to turn around what you just said on the other direction and say, could you give an artist's method to judge the validity of science? A lot of the time it comes down to beauty. So could you speak about, in your crossover work, how that plays out?
Yes. Well, I think both the sciences and the arts are driven to some extent by seeking beauty. And in science, the best scientists have always had a very strong aesthetic. Einstein, for example, was guided frequently by his aesthetic for unity, symmetry, and it turns out that our human concept, our human aesthetic sensibility seems to usually to be in accord with nature. That is, if you have two ways of constructing a theory to explain how a ball falls from the ceiling to the floor, and one of them has a more beautiful form, then it usually turns out that that's the correct theory, in the sense that that one agrees with experiment more than the other one. It's not always the case. There have been some occasions where our concept of beauty failed us. For example, the early astronomers believed that all of the orbits of planets were perfect circles, because that was the most beautiful and simple geometric shape, and that turned out to be incorrect. But usually our human sense of beauty and aesthetics does seem in accord with nature. And of course, I think in the arts, I don't have to say anything about that. Everybody understands that very well. And I think that the other, to me, the other goal of the sciences and the arts are both seeking, and we talked about this before in different language, was truth. The sciences, truth in the external world, the world of mass and force, and in the arts, the truth in the world of the mind and the heart, and the internal world. So the methods may be very different, but I think that in terms of those two large categories of beauty and truth, that they are both after the same thing.
a perfect point for a segue into Mr. G territory. How do these two different lenses on truth and on beauty somehow point towards religion? Why does religion become in the middle of that discussion? And, at least in recent times, there's been a lot of clashes between science and religion traditionally, and yet art has served both. Art has kind of like been fine serving religion and serving science on both halves. How do these kind of, I don't want to say conflicts because that's a biased thing, but how is there this relationship with religion in the science and the art that you do?
Well, I think science and religion are both searching for, looking for meaning. I mean, we said truth and beauty. I mean, I would add meaning to that. And I mean, all of us want to know what's the meaning of it all. What's the meaning of the cosmos? What's the meaning of our individual lives? And I think certainly science and religion. Science is searching for meaning not in the ethical and philosophical domains, but in understanding the cosmos. And that is a kind of meaning as well, I think. Certainly understanding that the Earth is not the only planet in the cosmos, that the Earth is not the center of the cosmos, that the universe is not infinitely old, but began at a certain time in the past. That all has great philosophical and theological meaning. So although science may not be directly trying to answer theological and philosophical questions, which it can't do, I think the findings of science bear upon those questions. And I think the reason why the arts are a powerful bridge between the science and religion, to me, is through this question of meaning, that I think the arts, as you described it, the arts very well in your own experience in creating, that you are trying to look at things from different perspectives as an artist. And you're constantly turning things upside down and trying to understand things from different perspectives. And I think that resonates with the human desire for meaning. So that would be a guess about why. So I'd like to hear your explanation.
Well, I mean, I'm interested in kind of trying to unpack, like if we say the words science, art, and religion to the 70 odd people that are here, we have 70 definitions of each word. So I feel like what you're saying is it might be interesting to unpack a little further. For example, many scientists use science as the lens for meaning. So as someone who has a foot in science and a foot in art and is obviously interested in religion, do you find that there are aspects of meaning that you have access to through thinking of religion or religious practice or anything like that science doesn't kind of cross that gap?
Well, in thinking about what religion is, I'm trying to remember now the definition that William James gave, who was the great Harvard philosopher, and wrote this profound book called The Varieties of Religious Experience, in which he talked to a great many people from different cultures about their religious experience. And I'm not going to remember this exactly, but it's something like this, that religion is the belief in an unseen order in the world, and that our supreme good lies in adapting ourselves to that order. And I think it's a beautiful definition of religion, it does not necessarily require the belief in God, although it might. I like the word belief there because it emphasizes the fact that the religious experience is a very personal one. It's not something that's subject to proof the way that a physicist proves how long it will take a ball to hit the ground. I like the unseen order part of it because a lot of what we believe in various religious traditions is something that's invisible. And I like the word good. Our supreme good lies in our adapting ourselves to it, because that suggests the ethical dimensions of religion, that religion is not only just about believing or not believing in a white-haired guy that sits up there, but it's also about how we should live our lives, a moral and ethical behavior. So I hope that unpacks it a little bit on the religious side.
Yeah, it's interesting to me in terms of the different types of knowledge that can exist in somebody. There's this, in scientific theory, we come up with for example, Darwin's theory of evolution. We have all this evidence and we construct a theory of the way things go. And this is a theory that is here that we all kind of can look at in the data that we take, and we can compare to that theory and say, well, yes, within our error bars, this is working or this isn't. The religious experience of knowledge, as we've seen in all the different, religious conflicts with science, conflicts with other religions, is so personal that it might not even be possible for it to ever be translated across the medium of words or the medium of concepts. As someone who was formerly more heavily involved in physics and have now kind of been doing more and more art that involves those things, a lot of it felt like it was this feeling of, there really is something completely and utterly beyond communicability in our experience. And I often think that we look at some of these religious experiences almost backwards, because the people that report religious experience report higher senses of certainty in those experiences than the average person reports about their everyday experience. They kind of say that as far as context is concerned, they saw the former context of their life from a wider perspective. And I wonder sometimes when I think about how humans have come to be, and we look at our tradition being lizards and being mammals and this sort of thing, and having no ability to conceive of our existence, and then humans coming along, and now we actually have this understanding and conceptualization. It seems like sometimes that conceptualization can actually cover the natural being that we might have experienced day to day being a lizard. Just the fact that there was nothing of this kind of like cloudiness going along all day, and we were just doing what we're doing, being that lizard. So I sometimes think that these descriptions of religious experience are so simple that they get sometimes explained as these gigantic explosions, when actually actually when I'm not thinking about myself as separate, things are just automatically happening. This movement of the universe is this unstoppable thing, and it's almost been this really deep irony to me that forms any conflict with science, because it seems like both of those things can work so powerfully together once we get past the idea that language can describe everything.
Yes, well, I think there's some kinds of religious belief that are completely compatible with science, and there are other kinds of belief which are not compatible with science. And at the risk of offending some of the 70 people who are here, I think that the belief in an intervening God, and I think by God we all roughly mean some being that is not subject to the laws of nature, that exists outside of time and space. And I think that all religious traditions have that as a minimal understanding of God. But if God intervenes in the physical world and performs miracles that are not subject, performs actions that are not subject to the laws of nature, which an omnipotent God could do, then I think that definitely is in violation with science. Now, having said that, there are a small number of scientists, maybe about 5% of all scientists, who do believe in an intervening God. And I have a very distinguished colleague at MIT, Ian Hutchinson, professor of nuclear engineering, who's in this category, and I have a distinguished colleague at Harvard, Owen Gingerich, who also is in this category. And the way that Gingerich and Hutchinson reconcile their life's work and commitment to science and the value of the laws of nature with their belief in an intervening God is that they say that the laws of nature govern the physical universe most of the time, but occasionally God can intervene and perform miracles, and when God does intervene on those rare occasions, that intervention is not analyzable or understandable by the methods of science. So that's the way they do it.
You point out this really interesting thing to me, which has been growing up, and let me preface this by saying I love science. I think it's really beautiful. This comment can sound anti-science, so I want to protect against that. I grew up, and when you read about science, you read about this is the way the world works. You don't really kind of learn about all the stumbling blocks that all these people came along when they were trying to figure out. You don't really learn much about that process, which is in some sense really sad because the questioning part is so powerful. When I was going through physics and seeing the range of scientists that existed, from the people that are kind of the classic Einsteins to the other end of the spectrum, where I saw this kind of intense selfishness about owning the theories that were being discovered. It kind of started to expose to me that there was this there's this internal conflict sometimes between science and scientists, where the scientific method we have seen for hundreds of years now just expose and expose and expose wider regions of our understanding. But when I have professors that find out that someone else discovered something and they throw lab equipment across the room, well, are they really doing unbiased experimentation to try to find out the answers, or are they, are we permanently subject to the humanness involved in the scientific process, or is that something we can actually hold ourselves to?
Well, it's a great point that you make, and I think you're absolutely right. Individual scientists are not unbiased and not completely objective. Individual scientists are driven by passion like artists, and I would argue, first of all, that passion is a double-edged sword. That the passion is necessary to push scientists to work day and night in their laboratories, as they do, to be totally driven by a problem and keep working on the problem over and over, day after day, year after year, until you've solved it. That passion is necessary for that. There's certainly, most scientists are not doing it for the money. On the other hand, that same passion can cause individual scientists to lose their objectivity. And there are many famous cases. Cold fusion was one of them with Pons and Fleischmann about 15 years ago, whenever it was. Many famous cases of where scientists have defended their claims emotionally, even in the face of contradictory evidence. So scientists are human beings, and then you ask, well, where is the scientific method, this search for objectivity, is that a myth? Well, it's not a myth, because the objective nature of science comes from the community of scientists critiquing each other's work. It does not come from individual scientists. Individual scientists are biased, prejudiced, emotional. Many are, but the community of scientists who are reviewing each other's papers, trying to reproduce experiments, critiquing each other, getting envious and jealous of each other, so trying to find fault. Through all of that collective activity arises the objectivity of science.
So I'm going to end us here. I think that's a great place to end. And I want to thank you all for coming. And thank you so much for a beautiful conversation.